I was looking forward to getting married. We were gonna have like the fairy tale life. We first met online, it was in June of 2017. Patrick was definitely movie star handsome. He definitely had the whole package. I am Jessica Devnani, and Patrick de la Cerda was my fiance.
This was your engagement ring?
Yes.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. He never got to give it to me.
Patrick de la Cerda was planning his future. Him and Jessica were looking forward to moving towards West Palm. That's where Patrick's mother, Patricia, lived.
And one day he came and he said, "Mom, this one is the one. This one is the one." And he was waiting for the ring.
That morning just started off a normal morning for him and Jessica. They texted each other, "Good morning, I love you."
He had got a phone call from his dad saying that there was a package being delivered at the gate. He thought it was the ring that was coming in that day.
So Patrick then goes down, probably looking forward to this, right?
Yes.
He would usually call her, and that was about the time she was getting to work, which, made her worry.
And it's like she instinctually knew something was wrong at that point.
And why were you afraid for Patrick?
I was afraid because of the threats that were made in the past.
I'm making a phone call, I'm giving instructions, and I'm gonna have my plan put into action.
You felt at that moment that something terrible may have happened.
Yes. I left work right away to be on my way to check on Patrick.
You get here as quickly as you can.
Yes, I got up right along this path. I had to climb the fence.
I don't think Patrick de la Cerda had any idea what was waiting for him on the other side of that door. There was multiple shots fired. Patrick was hit multiple times. It appeared that he was killed in like ambush style.
And I'll never forget the scene. Like, it's still in my head every day.
My boyfriend's house is his dad's house.
If anybody else is here. Is anybody else here?
It was just the worst thing you could ever see in your entire life.
Yeah, they said they're still very friendly.
Clearly, this wasn't a random killing.
Someone had a vendetta against Patrick.
It was personal and it was planned. It was an assassination.
My whole future was taken away from me. My whole world was taken away.
Sheriff's officer, get in there, come on now!
That day, we were at the office, kind of going through casework and paperwork and things like that.
What started as a slow Tuesday morning back in 2018 for Volusia County, Florida Sheriff's Detective Chad Weaver changed dramatically
911, where's your emergency?
when this fragmented 911 call from a neighbor reporting Patrick de la Cerda's death came in.
Has been shot and killed.
When did that happen?
I don't know.
You don't want to try CPR, correct?
No, he's dead. He's cold.
Within minutes, sheriff's deputies, wearing body cameras, entered this lush 9-acre compound on the outskirts of Deltona. worried that the killer may still be here.
Sheriff's office, if you're inside, you need to announce yourself now.
When the deputies showed up, they had their guns out and preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best.
With the gunman still at large, Detective Weaver took charge of the crime scene as TV news choppers hovered above.
As we walked up to that area, you could see a male, looked like he was in his early 20s, appeared that he was suffering from multiple gunshot wounds.
Deputies say someone shot right through his front door.
25-year-old Patrick de la Cerda had been shot 4 times by a high-powered rifle, right in the doorway of the house he shared with his father, Max, who was out of town that day.
I never got to say goodbye to my son. I never got to talk to him. Nothing.
You can see the front door was open. There's glass all over the place. There's a lot of blood. You know, right off the bat, you're going, okay, this is probably going to be a whodunit.
At the scene, Detective Weaver and several deputies approached a traumatized Jessica Devnani, Patrick's 29-year-old fiancée.
My boyfriend's house and his dad's house.
I was just walking in circles around like the front yard, just pacing up and down.
Ma'am, come over here. Stay here, behind the tree.
Just 2 months earlier, at this very location, Patrick had popped the question to Jessica and presented her with this temporary engagement ring.
It just came out of nowhere. He just asked, like, you know, will you marry me?
And what did you say?
Of course, I said yes. I was so excited.
The marriage proposal couldn't have come at a better time for Jessica, who worked as a bank teller. Months earlier, she had ended a tumultuous 8-year relationship and then met Patrick on a dating app.
We just fell in love like right away. It was a connection from the beginning, so it was kind of like love at first sight.
Jessica and Patrick, who worked a construction job with his father,
Pat the Builder,
partied and played together as their romance blossomed. Patrick ordered this custom-made work of art to be delivered to his home for Jessica's permanent engagement ring. He was a romantic, says his mother, Patricia Rons.
Patrick was a wonderful son, and he loved kids, he loved babies, and I really was looking forward to have grandchildren from him.
Jessica and Patrick lived in different cities. She was in Orlando, while Patrick lived with his father in Deltona, 30 miles away. On the night of February 26, 2018, Patrick left her this sweet voicemail.
I love you. Good night. Sweet dreams. Call in the morning. I'll call you. I'll send you a text when I wake up, all right? Love you. Good night. Bye.
It would be the last voicemail she would ever receive from her love. The next day, a series of what seemed like random events would change everything. The first came when Patrick's father, Max, who was 70 miles away working on a construction job, received a phone call.
So Max gets a phone call from an unknown person stating that they have a package to deliver to his son, Patrick. Max hangs up the phone. He tries to call Patrick. Patrick doesn't answer, so he sends him a text message. Hey, there's someone with a delivery. Max never hears from Patrick again after that. He never answers, never responds.
Meanwhile, Max and Jessica kept calling Patrick with no luck. Jessica feared the worst because of those disturbing threats the couple had received.
You're thinking he's been harmed.
Yes. Yes, for sure.
Max and Jessica rushed to the house. She got there first.
I'm approaching the front door, and that's where his body laid. Patrick just laying there, and this big pool of blood, and he was just lifeless.
Soon after Jessica discovered her fiancé's body, Patrick's dad arrived. He took us back to the crime scene with Jessica.
my son was lying down there. His head was right there. His foot were still on top of this. So that means that he fell back.
And that tells you the gunman was right here.
Yeah, that tells me that the
no
gun,
bullet can take a right-hand turn.
Exactly, that guy was right there. My son saw this guy. He turned around, and the guy shot him because my son was just like this. My son was like this.
Wow.
Detective Weaver's team combed through the house. They soon discovered that the killer had taken Patrick's computer.
We got a camera above us, too.
And the hard drive from the home security camera system. Investigators also recovered unique shell casings from 300 blackout ammunition, bullets often used in semi-automatic weapons like an AR-15.
When we saw the shell casings with how close they were to the body, immediately realized that this was a calculated murder. This was planned.
But why would anyone want to kill Patrick de la Cerda? Weaver learned about a bizarre incident in 2017.
In a strange twist, News 6 discovered the young man has been shot at before.
When Patrick called police saying his neighbor had fired some bullets after arguments back and forth about trespassing, Patrick wasn't harmed.
There had been some complaints, and maybe Patrick felt that the neighbor was shooting towards their house.
This is night footage of the man being tackled and arrested by police for that incident. It was an intriguing lead until Weaver learned the man was in custody on the day Patrick was murdered.
So we were able to check him off the list.
Detective Weaver then focused on some ominous voicemails that had been discovered.
Call me back and talk to me.
Which led them to a man that Patrick and Jessica knew quite well.
I'll talk to you soon, I hope.
I was really scared because, he was always shadowing my life.
Learn more about Jessica and Patrick's relationship at 48hours.com.
A couple in love with everything in front of them. Dreams of marriage and family about to come true.
Jessica, look this way.
Then came February 27th, 2018. When Jessica Devnani came upon her fiancé, Patrick de la Cerda, in a pool of blood at his home, shot 4 times at close range by an assassin.
I think my mind just doesn't want to accept it. My whole future was taken away from me. My whole world was taken away.
The ambush-style assault of Patrick made it seem like the killer was lying in wait. Detective Chad Weaver was hoping Jessica might have a lead that would jumpstart his investigation.
And we were speaking to her about any enemies or any problems with anyone that Patrick had had.
The detective learned that there was someone who wasn't happy with Jessica and Patrick's whirlwind romance.
Who was that person?
My ex, Gregory Bender.
Jessica told Detective Weaver that right before she met Patrick, she broke up with Bender, her ex-boyfriend of 8 years. It was a breakup that he was not happy with.
He was not accepting of it. It's almost like he never left. He was always shadowing my life. He was not accepting of it at all.
He was very controlling.
And as Weaver was about to learn, Jessica and Bender had a very complicated love-hate kind of relationship over the 8 years they were together.
He could be very charming and manipulative.
At 42 years old, Bender was almost twice Jessica's age when they first met online in 2009. He was a successful hedge fund manager who lived in this house in Windermere, a wealthy suburb outside of Orlando.
He had a very charismatic personality. He was very intelligent. It felt like we'd known each other all our lives. He became my best friend.
Was he a down-to-earth kind of guy?
Not so much in the sense that he did like to show off. He loved fast cars and he loved guns as well.
But what, if anything, did Gregory Bender have to do with Patrick's death? Detective Weaver wanted to know more.
Patrick was middle-class, blue-collar, hard-working young man. Gregory, on the other hand, who's white-collar, well-educated, lived in a $750,000 house. Totally different people from totally different walks of life.
Jessica told the detective that Greg Bender simply couldn't tolerate the idea of any other man in her life. She told a story about what happened when she briefly dated someone else after first meeting Greg.
He did stalk the person that I was dating, and he described exactly where he lived, and he said that he would tie him up and harm him.
So a relationship that had love in it now had a little bit of terror in it.
I never feared what he could do to me, but I feared what he could do to other men.
Despite his jealousness and verbal threats, Jessica accepted Greg's proposal to marry a few years into their relationship.
I was in love with him at the time, and maybe I was a little bit naive at the time. I didn't want to find someone else.
And there is another twist in Jessica's twisted relationship with Greg. In early 2016, he was having a procedure done at a local hospital. Jessica decided to drop by for a surprise visit. When she entered Greg's room, another woman was there.
I was like, "What are you doing here?" She's like, "What are you doing here?" And I told her, I'm his fiance, and I showed her the ring, and then she showed me her ring. She's like, "I'm his wife."
She was this woman, Damara Sanchez.
He's secretly married to this woman?
Yes. My heart just dropped. I couldn't believe it. I was in shock.
Several days passed when Bender finally called Jessica and tried to explain that he had only married Sanchez so her son could go to school in the district where his house was located.
He said, "I'm so sorry." And he told me that he had only married her as like a business marriage. He was just trying to help her out, and they had an arrangement together.
At that point, Jessica had sort of had enough.
So you end up giving Greg Bender an ultimatum. What was that?
Yes, I told him that he had till the end of the year to leave her.
He had to divorce her, not only leave, but divorce.
Yes.
But that business marriage line was just another of Bender's lies, and he stayed married to Damara. With that, Jessica finally ended the relationship in 2017. 1 month later, Jessica met Patrick and began dating him. But Bender was often on her mind.
I was afraid that he would find out about our relationship.
But just 5 months after dumping him,
Gregory Bender came across our Facebook page. He immediately started messaging Patrick on his Facebook, threatening him, and he said, "I know where you live. I'm gonna harm you guys."
Bender left ominous voicemails like this one.
I'm giving instructions, and I'm going to have my plan put into action.
What's he talking about?
At that point in time, he had mentioned to me that he was gonna hire a hitman, or he was gonna do the job himself.
And what job was that?
To kill Patrick.
Enough was enough. Jessica and Patrick had these tapes and text messages presented to a judge who issued this restraining order. Bender was ordered to stay away from Jessica and turn in his large collection of firearms to authorities.
Did Greg Bender go away?
We thought he did go away. We didn't hear anything, and we felt confident.
Until, she told Detective Weaver, on the morning of Patrick's murder, Gregory Bender called for the first time in 2 months.
He called my job that very morning.
But Jessica said she didn't answer.
So when she got the phone call and saw on the caller ID that it was Gregory Bender, flags started going up, and that's what made her so worried.
Flags were also going up for Detective Weaver. He believed he now had a prime suspect in Patrick's death. And Weaver had an idea. Now was the time for Jessica to return Bender's calls, and investigators would listen in.
She really wanted to solve Patrick's murder. So she did that without hesitation.
Okay. Call him and put him on speaker.
Hello?
Hello?
Detective Weaver was hopeful Bender might say something to implicate himself.
You ruined my life. You got your revenge, and you ruined my life.
What are you talking about?
Hello?
Hi.
Hey.
It was a tense, awkward moment. Just a few hours after she'd seen her fiancé's body, investigators asked Jessica Devnani to call the man they thought may have murdered him. Greg Bender quickly spoke up.
I saw what happened on the news. I want to tell you, I feel sorry for you.
I just wanted to try to do everything I could to help the investigation.
She reminded Bender about his previous threats.
And we said, enough is enough. I can't do this. I'm going to hire a hitman. I'm going to kill him.
No, that's not, no. I didn't say that.
Did you ask him outright, did you shoot Patrick?
I did. But that's why I want to find out if it is you.
No, it's not. I'm your friend. I did not do this.
Could you tell he was lying to you?
Yes, I could tell he was lying.
While Bender denied any involvement in Patrick's death, Detective Chad Weaver says there was enough evidence to arrest him, not for murder, but for violating that restraining order.
We had seen that he had attempted to contact her twice at work, which we found was a violation of that injunction.
Even with Bender behind bars for the night, Detective Weaver didn't have much to link him to Patrick's murder. Then he received a phone call from the attorney of Bender's now ex-wife, Demara Sanchez, the woman Jessica had first met in the hospital.
And he said, she has some information that will be valuable to your case.
Demara asked to meet Detective Weaver in a parking lot.
She's very, very nervous. She didn't want us coming to her house.
It turns out Demara had a pretty good reason to be nervous. She was about to provide a crucial piece of evidence.
So we spoke with her, and she had told us that her and Gregory had gotten a divorce and she moved out in December of 2017. Around that same time, she had discovered what she believed to be a murder plan in a spiral notebook that she had seen Gregory writing in the past.
A murder plan, handwritten in a notebook detailing an elaborate plot to kill. Demara said when she confronted Bender about it, he told her it was all a fantasy, and she forgot about it.
25-year-old Volusia County man is dead.
Until she saw the report that the man Bender was supposedly fantasizing about killing had just been murdered.
But once she told us about the murder plan, and that gave us what we needed to get into the house to see, what else was in there.
Volusia County prosecutor Ashley Terwilliger says learning about the murder plan was a potential game changer if investigators could find it.
So the next day, February 28th of 2018, they execute the search warrant at Gregory Bender's home in Orange County, Florida, in Windermere.
Detective Weaver had some doubts. But almost as soon as he entered Bender's house, Weaver hit pay dirt. He spotted several balls of crumpled up notepaper.
I looked in the trash can and I was in shock. It's like, there's no way that we just found this murder plan. The first thing I wanted to do was reach in the trash can, grab it.
Weaver wisely held off while this paper was bagged and tagged for forensics. Later, when he was able to read the plan, it was just as Demara said, a detailed roadmap for murdering Patrick de la Cerda.
Some of the first things in it were directions, and it actually had Patrick de la Cerda's address, Talon Boulevard.
Weaver took us to the crime scene to explain how the plan matched the actual murder.
This road leads down the side of the property. It's off of Howland Boulevard. This is important because the dirt road that was drawn on the murder plan runs down the side of the property. It's pretty heavily wooded down this way, so I think he walked on foot until he got to this opening. And this is the area that we believe Gregory Bender accessed to sneak up on our victim. The sketch of the property was spot on.
The plan was evidence of Bender's obsession with detail and compulsion to kill, says Weaver. The plan read, put duct tape on the bottom of a second pair of shoes so no tread prints. Wait for confirm that he is alone. Then turn off cell phones and dispose of clothes, plate, tracker, gloves. With the murder plan in hand, Weaver had a powerful case against Bender. And with the discovery of this ammunition, there was now a direct link to those unique bullet shells found at the scene.
They find that arsenal of 300 blackout ammunition.
Remember, Patrick was shot 4 times with that type of unique ammo, but only 2 shell casings were recovered at the crime scene. That's what made another discovery by investigators at Bender's house so important.
They find a shell casing in a desk drawer, essentially a junk drawer.
The casing matched the 2 recovered shell casings from the crime scene. Short of actually finding the murder weapon, In my opinion, I think that was probably the most important piece of evidence that we found.
That's because the murder weapon has never been recovered, although Jessica remembers seeing a powerful rifle at Bender's house when they dated.
The AR-15, the semi-automatic rifle, did he have one of those?
Yes, he did.
I think it's probably at the bottom of a lake somewhere.
The evidence was overwhelming. Weaver now had a clear and concise theory of the crime.
Greg Bender was lying in wait in the bushes, just out of view. He made the phone call posing as a delivery man. Patrick receives the text messages thinking that he has a package. And as Patrick answered the door, he shot and killed him.
Less than 48 hours after Patrick's death, an arrest warrant was issued for Gregory Bender, charging him with the murder. Volusia County Sheriff's deputies had an easy time locating their suspect, who had been released from jail after violating that restraining order. Bender was in his own front yard, says prosecutor Andrew Urbanik.
And Mr. Bender actually showed up, bonded out from the Orange County Jail just a short time after they started executing that warrant.
For Patrick's mother, the arrest is just the first step against a man she despises.
Psychopath, that's what he is. Do you want me to say his name? I've never pronounced his name. I don't want to pronounce his name. That is hurting my mouth to just say his name.
Why did Patrick have to die?
Just out of jealousy of a man that was obsessed. He thought that by doing this that I would go back to him.
But with no weapon, no eyewitnesses, and no DNA at the crime scene,
ultimately, this case is a circumstantial case.
Bender and his attorneys are planning a vigorous trial defense.
You started dating Patrick in June.
And using undercover video shot by a private eye, they plan to challenge Jessica on the stand about the real nature of her relationship with Greg Bender.
Why are you dining with Greg and going to Greg's house in November of 2017 if you're happily moving on with Patrick?
What do you make of Gregory Bender leaving his murder plan in the trash can?
Two months after Patrick de la Cerda was gunned down as he went to his front door, expecting to pick up that engagement ring for Jessica Devnani,
He got me the perfect ring.
she was finally able to put on the ring at her 30th birthday celebration, a surprise finally delivered by Patrick's family.
Why do you wear that ring today?
I wear it because Patrick will always be the love of my life.
And Jessica will be wearing the ring at the murder trial of Greg Bender, her former boyfriend who stands accused of stalking and killing the man she had hoped to marry.
All right.
This day could not have come soon enough, says Patrick's devastated mother, Patricia.
Jessica and I, we felt victimized every single day for 3 years and a half because we have no voice, absolutely no voice.
Prosecutor Ashley Terwilliger is now the voice Patrick's loved ones had longed for as she began her opening statement.
Patrick de la Cerda was the victim of a murder, a detailed and meticulously thought out murder plan, and a tragic ending in which he was shot 4 times in the head, face, chest, and hip.
Defense attorney Richard Parker says the state's case is no slam dunk.
And we'll show that there's more than just 1 or 2 people that have motive and opportunity in this case.
Jessica is the prosecution's star witness and will be the first to testify.
It was really hard. I was really nervous.
Jessica describes for the jury how Gregory Bender was a man consumed by jealousy, who made many threats.
He would message me saying if I didn't leave Patrick, he would harm Patrick.
And Jessica read one of those threatening texts for the jury.
Think about it. If I don't hear from you or the cops, call again. I'll just do what I said and move on.
Jurors learned that Bender went to extraordinary lengths to poison Jessica and Patrick's relationship. As you can see on this secretly recorded video, it appears Bender and Jessica are at lunch, and then a week later at a restaurant enjoying dinner, just a few months after she started dating Patrick. Prosecutor Andrew Urbanik.
Did you actually see these videos?
I did.
The encounters were captured by a private investigator hired by Bender. There's a scene of the two of them entering and leaving Bender's home. He's seen rubbing Jessica's leg for the camera. They hold hands. And here, he leans in for a kiss.
It felt really odd. I felt like he was trying to put on a show because he kept trying to get close to me and trying to hold my hand, which he never used to do. I was like, what are you doing? I was like, we're just friends right now. What are you trying to do?
But prosecutors say the video was all a setup.
What did he do with it?
He had given it to Patrick.
Did that cause some strife between you and Patrick in your relationship?
Yes. We had a fight and we had broke up for a few days.
Did the two of you end up getting back together after that?
Yes.
Defense attorneys tried to use their client's video production to convince jurors that Jessica and Bender actually were more than just friends.
Why are you dining with Greg and going to Greg's house in November of 2017 if you're happily moving on with Patrick?
Because the defendant was threatening and I was trying to calm him down. And he said that if I went to see him, he would not harm anyone.
The defense tries another tactic, making what prosecutors say is an unfounded allegation that Patrick's father, Max, was attracted to Jessica.
Did Max de la Cerda comment in a very positive way regarding your appearance?
Same objection, Judge. Still hearsay statement.
Would you say you have a good relationship with her?
I didn't have a relationship with her at all.
That led to a combative cross-examination when Max took the stand.
What you're asking is making no sense. I don't think that has nothing to do with Patrick's murder.
And the defense implied he may have had the motive and the opportunity to kill his own son because of discrepancies in his whereabouts that day.
Your girlfriend said that you were in fact staying with her. Is it her memory that's wrong or is it yours?
It might be mine, sir. I'm constantly on the go. I work here, I work there. I don't keep track of phones. I don't keep track of time. So what point are you trying to make? I don't know.
They wanted to blame it on Max, and you can tell he's angry that his son was killed unnecessarily, violently, horrifically, and now he has to be in a room with his son's killer.
Throughout the trial, Bender remained stoic until his ex-wife Damaris Sanchez took the stand and spoke through an interpreter.
Were you married to Mr. Bender?
¿Usted estaba casada con el señor Bender?
Sí.
Yes.
During Damaris' testimony, Bender broke down, showing emotion for the first time in the trial. And jurors heard her audio interview with Weaver about the murder plan.
It was a plan to kill the guy, I guess.
The guy's Patrick.
Yeah.
During a break in her testimony, Bender appears to say, "I love you" to someone in the gallery and is admonished by an official.
Don't talk to anybody in the courtroom.
When Detective Weaver took the stand, the defense grilled him about the lack of forensic evidence in the case.
How about any hair or skin or DNA, anything like that from the scene that was helpful to your investigation?
No, sir.
Prosecutors responded by calling cell phone experts who could connect Greg Bender's personal phone to a burner phone that was tracked to a cell tower near the murder scene.
So the burner phone is the cell phone that made the call to Max de la Cerda that morning at 7:18 a.m.
Yes.
The state would rest at this time.
Thank you.
After the prosecution rested, Greg Bender chose not to testify.
Are you comfortable with the decision you have made?
Yes. Thank you, Your Honor.
For closing arguments, prosecutors said Greg Bender was the only person who had motive to kill Patrick.
He couldn't take that Jessica left him and wouldn't come back to him because of Patrick de la Cerda.
Counsel, you may proceed.
In his closing, defense attorney Richard Parker insisted that Bender's murder plan did not equate to guilt.
This case is about the difference between a fantasy and reality. People should not be judged on their worst thoughts just because they put them to paper. But that's what they're doing in this case.
Finally, after 4 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. Prosecutor Andy Urbanik was uncertain about what verdict they'd come back with.
Once it goes to the jury, we can't make any guarantees.
But Jessica Devnani was confident a guilty verdict would finally put an end to Bender's reign of terror.
It's my understanding you have a verdict.
I just wanted to see the expression on his face.
This is where my son lives. Go ahead. We'll follow you.
This is his place.
Okay, this was Patrick's place.
Memories,
This is for my Christmas card that he gave me.
tender words from a son.
Dad, with all my love, thank you for always being there for me. To many more years, love, Patrick.
Max de la Cerda surrounds himself with reminders of his son,
That's Patrick.
taken violently and far too soon.
I feel my son's present here. I haven't moved his stuff. I have, everything is pretty much the same because I love this kid so much, man.
The only reason make me feel better is that I lost my child for love.
Patrick's mother, Patricia, has found some solace in her suffering.
He had love in his heart when he passed. He was going down the stair to get the ring.
And Jessica Devnani still wears that very engagement ring in honor of a marriage that never took place.
It's been hard past 3 years. Like, I've been living in respect to Patrick.
But now, Patrick's loved ones huddle together, hoping finally, 3 years after Patrick's murder, the jury will give them justice.
State of Florida v. Gregory Bender.
During 4 days of testimony, they relived the horror of his death, listening to excruciating details of Bender's murder plan.
We can see an entrance wound on the right side of the face.
It's my understanding you have a verdict. Is that correct?
As the verdict was about to be read, Bender looked directly at Jessica.
He was looking at me. I don't know what was going on in his head.
Madam Clerk, if you could please read the verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Gregory Bender, as follows. Guilty of the charge of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment.
And it's guilty, and he's faced as what?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
In Florida, a conviction of first-degree murder carries an automatic life sentence without parole. So just moments after the emotion of victory, Patrick's loved ones are allowed to address the court as Greg Bender listens just a few feet away.
First, Your Honor,
Patrick's mother.
I want to thank all of you for having put evil where it belongs.
Jessica then spoke, but chose not to look at her tormentor.
You will not win. You have only lost. I hope you feel some peace, Patrick. Rest assured, the man who took your life is going to pay with his own life now.
Then it was Max's turn.
I will miss my son, and I regret that I wasn't there for him to save him.
Remember that during the trial, the defense shamefully tried to suggest that Max may have been involved in his son's murder.
I hope they keep you in jail until you die there. Until you died. Because the moment you step out, I'm going to finish you off. I'm going to peel you like an onion. The same thing you did to my son.
Max, you have to address the judge.
That?
You have to address the judge.
I will miss my son. He was a beautiful soul. A beautiful kid.
And with that, Greg Bender was carted off to prison for the rest of his life.
He lost everything. He's not going to win again, ever again.
Jessica and Patricia are angry that this restraining order they felt would offer protection for Patrick turned out to be worthless.
My son would be today alive if the restraining order had been enforced by the law enforcement.
Bender had been ordered to turn over his gun collection to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. He never did. And without probable cause for a search warrant, law enforcement lacked the authority to seize those weapons.
It failed us. It failed Patrick.
Now behind bars, the days of Greg Bender lurking in the shadows of Jessica's life are finally over.
Will you go on with life as Patrick would like you to do?
I will. I will go on for Patrick. I will live in his happy memories close to my heart.
1 week after Greg Bender's conviction was what would have been Patrick's 29th birthday.
Patrick's mom and I, we went out to the cemetery in West Palm Beach, and we just celebrate his life. We brought some cake and we brought some champagne. And
What did you say to Patrick on his birthday when you were at his grave?
we finally did it. We got the guilty verdict. We always tell him we love him. We will always love him.
Accused of his mother's murder at 14.
What kid could commit a crime that violent and not leave any forensic evidence?
Then sentenced to life.
The state never really had any case against this kid.
Was he wrongfully convicted?
She was very close with Michael. He was her baby.
48 Hours, next on CBS.
You believe he was killed, correct?
Yes. My name is Alex Spiro. I'm a former prosecutor and I'm an attorney, and I'm investigating the disappearance of Don Lewis. There's witnesses and information that shed light on further facts and circumstances surrounding this.
Have you met these witnesses?
Yes.
And you believe them?
Yes.
There are new leads in the strange case of missing millionaire Don Lewis, a man who seemed to vanish without a trace.
We had lost all hope of ever knowing what happened to Dad.
And then they got some hope from a TV series.
Tiger King was an addictive Netflix documentary series. I'm Julie Miller. I'm the senior feature writer for Vanity Fair. Tiger King centers around Joe Exotic.
My name's Joe Exotic, and this is Sarge.
An Oklahoma-based animal cat owner, and his sworn enemy, his rival, Carol Baskin.
Talking about a woman down there in Tampa, Florida, named Carol Baskin.
Joe Exotic is this wild, cartoonish, flamboyant, openly gay, mulleted, tattooed, gun-toting, large animal owner. Kind of the Mick Jagger, I'd say, of the large cat animal world. Carol has fashioned herself as more of an animal activist.
Big cats don't belong in cages.
She says that what Joe is doing is not humane and should be stopped.
It'll be a cold day in hell before you completely stop me.
But also woven into this entertainment was this cold case.
Don Lewis, the owner of Wildlife on Easy Street, disappeared.
Carol's second husband, Don Lewis, disappeared under very mysterious circumstances. It was in 1997, and he just vanished. There have been all sorts of theories.
There's one that he was drugged and put in one of the small planes and dumped out in the Gulf.
If the plan was to push him out this door, that's a challenge.
The most insane theory probably being that Carol Baskin had her husband ground up in a meat grinder and fed him to the animals.
Word has it that Carol snuck up on Don in the middle of the night, beat him in the head, ground him up, and fed him to the tigers.
As bizarre as that sounds, this woman believes her ex-husband, who once worked for Don and Carol, may have revealed something about Don's fate during a fight.
He said, if you try to leave me again, I will put you in the grinder like I did Don.
In a meat grinder?
Yeah.
Her ex-husband denies her story. Do you believe her husband told her that he'd put her in a meat grinder the way he did to Don.
I will tell you that there is certain information she's provided that has been independently corroborated.
Who would you like to interview the most?
Carol Baskin.
I didn't kill Don.
People want answers. They want to know what happened to Don Lewis.
Like it or not, the Tiger King, Joe Exotic, is back, along with his arch enemy, Carol Baskin.
I'm talking about a woman down there in Tampa, Florida, named Carol Baskin.
Lots has happened to these two since we last heard from them. Netflix came out with a second season of its Tiger King series.
When you think you've seen it all, you haven't quite seen it all.
And Carol Baskin vented on a celebrity webcast called Hollywood Raw.
I really feel like this is going to be just another horrible year of people having the wrong idea about who I am and what I'm trying to do.
Carol Baskin began getting all that attention when she was trying to shut down Joe Exotic's private zoo in Oklahoma.
She has spent over $1.5 million just trying to shut me down.
Joe fought back. His weapon was a music video with a sensational message. Featuring his idea of a Carol Baskin lookalike, his video charged that Carol murdered her husband, Don Lewis, and fed him to their tigers. Carol has denied the allegation vigorously and repeatedly, but millions of viewers saw the video, and suddenly the heat was turned up on a cold case. What happened to Carol's husband, Don? The show even lit a fire under the local sheriff's department.
We re-interviewed everybody and have looked at new evidence and continue to investigate.
Investigators say only 2 people have declined to be interviewed by law enforcement. One of them is Carol Baskin.
Carol is considered a suspect and a person of interest.
It was 40 years ago that Carol first became a person of interest to Don Lewis. Like so many Florida stories, theirs begins like a pulp fiction novel that any reputable publisher would reject. It starts on an unusually chilly night in 1981 in Tampa. Carol was still a teenager and in a bad marriage. She found herself wandering in tears down a main street in the middle of the night. And just then, 42-year-old Don Lewis drove by in his truck. He had stepped out of the home he shared with his wife Gladys.
We had had an argument, and he left home and was headed to another girlfriend's house for the night, which I found out later. But he was going down the avenue, and here was a pretty blonde, and she was crying. And he told me that he stopped, and she got in the truck with him. And they spent the night together.
I'm sorry, so he was on his way to another girlfriend's house when he met with
Yes.
Carol and took her to a hotel or a motel?
Yes.
Wow. He was busy.
Yes, he was.
Don Lewis was busy with 2 main interests, money and women. Long before he picked up Carol that night on the street, he met Gladys. She was just 13 when he noticed her shopping with her mother.
And I looked up and I thought, whoa, he sure is good looking. And then he winked at me. And I turned around to see who he might be looking at, and there was no one there. So I said, I guess that was me.
A little more than a year later, Gladys and Don married. He was 17 with very little money, but very big plans.
He could tear anything apart, put it back together.
Don worked hard fixing broken machinery. He made enough money to buy and grow a trucking business. Then he started buying and selling Florida real estate. And along the way, he met Ann McQueen.
Don took somebody with an 8th grade education and taught them how to manage a multi-million-dollar business.
Ann kept the books and helped run things, and they were quite a team. Eventually, Don was worth, according to his lawyer, between $5 and $10 million. But you'd never know it. He did business out of a used trailer on an empty lot. He dressed in old jeans and cheap t-shirts. And his cash management system was quaint. What about burying money on the property? Did he do that?
Yes, he did.
That's kind of an interesting thing to do.
Well, somebody would pay him cash, and he loved having cash around, so we'd put it in a jar and just dig a hole under the little red barn we had.
I mean, where I'm from, people who want cash frequently go to the ATM. They don't go to the little red barn. But why do you suppose he didn't, go to the bank?
Well, he had plenty of money in the bank, too, so.
Don and Gladys raised a family. Their 3 daughters, Linda, Donna, and Gail, remember their childhoods as happy.
He was home every night. We always had dinner.
It was also a bit unusual, largely because Don had a thing for animals, mostly wild ones.
I wouldn't call it passionate, I would call it an obsession. So we would come home from school and there'd be a baby alligator swimming in the bathtub. There were ferrets and raccoons and horses and cows and
a penguin and a monkey.
Dad really loved animals.
But his daughters never knew about that other love of Don's, women. And not just their mother, Gladys. Was he a good husband?
He was until I would get a call and say he's seeing someone.
Ooh, well, that's, pardon me, doesn't sound like a good husband.
He was.
Up until that point.
Yes.
May I be a little impolite and ask you if you know roughly how many women he was seeing besides you?
If you're talking about the whole 34 years I was married to him, well, possibly 25.
Forgive me again for asking, but how did that make you feel?
Well, when I would find out, I would tell him I was leaving, and he would say, there'll be no more.
Did you believe him?
Of course, at that time, and as years went by, no. You have to make up your mind to live in that situation or let it drive you crazy.
Gladys was pretty good about living with a serial philanderer, and then Don met Carol. Was there any sense when he met her that she was different than the other 24 some odd women?
No, she was just like the other 25, but I would say more greedy because she did find out that he had money.
What do you think of her?
You really want me to answer that?
I'd like to.
I think she's the worst thing that ever was born in the United States of America.
Wow, you don't mince words.
No, and there's more if you want them.
Don and Carol had been seeing each other for about 10 years when Gladys decided she'd had enough. She and Don finally divorced in 1990. A year later, Don married Carol. And before long, the new Mr. and Mrs. Lewis had a new business. They bought a bunch of big cats and put them on exhibit at a place called Wildlife on Easy Street. Don's former lawyer, Joseph Fritz.
He'd take a chair and sit in a yard with 10, 12 bobcats, them all over him and him playing with them like it was a household puppy.
But before long, there was difficulty on Easy Street. Don and Carol weren't getting along.
He told me then, he said, I want you to know right now, don't you or the girls or any of the grandkids or anybody be left in the room with her alone.
And then, after only 6 years of marriage, Don Lewis just vanished.
He wouldn't walk away and leave his cats. He wouldn't walk away and leave his business. I find it hard to believe he'd walk away and leave me.
In the days before he went missing, Don Lewis was planning to go to Costa Rica to sell some used cars and trucks.
He was supposed to go and get me some VIN numbers and supposed to call me back, and he didn't.
Was that like him? I mean, did he do that frequently?
No, Don and I spoke on a daily basis. I finally reached Carol. I kind of asked her if she knew where her husband was, and her answer to me was no, that she hadn't seen him since the day before. And she asked me if I thought that she should call the police, and I think I made a smart aleck remark and said something like, you think, yeah, you need to do that.
There were some not so subtle signs that there were problems in Don and Carol's marriage. And Don's daughter, Donna, had sensed trouble between the two.
He thought she was crazy.
Crazy?
He didn't like the way she spent money.
The couple also reportedly fought about what to do with the animals. Carol wanted to keep them and make Easy Street a sanctuary. Don, so the story goes, wanted to breed and sell them. He had talked about getting a divorce, and if he had gone through with it, it could have been costly, says Don's lawyer, Joe Fritz. So she would have lost a considerable amount of money.
Millions.
That's considerable.
That's considerable.
The couple made a lot of money while they were together, but it turned out there were more signs of trouble. After Don disappeared, Ann McQueen says she remembered a sealed envelope that he had given her 2 months earlier.
He came to the office, and he was agitated, and he gave me an envelope, and he said, take this, keep it in a safe place. He either said, take it to the police, or you'll know what to do with it if anything ever happens. I took it home. I didn't think anything about it.
But after Don went missing, Ann says she opened the envelope.
He was asking the judge for a restraining order.
Just months before he disappeared, Don tried unsuccessfully to get a restraining order against Carol, telling the judge, Carol has gotten angry enough to threaten to kill me. She has a .45 revolver, and she took my .357. Do you remember how you felt when you read the stuff about how she threatened to kill him?
I started shaking.
Did you actually start shaking?
I'm shaking now.
Ann says she took the document to the sheriff's department, and while she was there, the burglar alarm went off at Don's office. Carol had set it off. According to the Tampa Bay Times, Carol got in with help from her father and Don's handyman, a man named Kenny Farr. And when Ann got back to the office, she says she was shocked.
Everything was gone. Everything that was in my desk was gone.
Including, she says, Don's will and power of attorney. Police said Carol's action was legal. After all, she was Don's wife. But Don's daughters were suspicious.
Well, to us, it's very odd. She may be his spouse, but she did not have a key at all to the gate or the office. So that says a lot right there.
But that's not the only odd thing. Carol gave this interview to the television show Hard Copy, suggesting Don might have had some kind of dementia.
Maybe he doesn't know who he is. Maybe he doesn't know where to call us.
But Don's lawyer, Joseph Fritz, says Don had no memory problems.
Absolutely none.
Did you see him shortly before he disappeared?
I saw him at least every week, and sometimes 2 or 3 times.
And Don's family doesn't believe Carol was really worried about Don, in part because they say weeks after he disappeared, she canceled Don's cell phone account.
If a person, at the beginning, your husband, you think he has dementia, he's got Alzheimer's, and now he's missing, do you turn his cell phone off after 2 or 3 weeks of him being missing? His only lifeline to reach you?
Yeah.
She turned
His
it
cell
off.
phone was turned off?
3 weeks
Yes.
after.
Cancel the account.
As the weeks turned into months, Carol offered another possibility. Instead of Costa Rica, maybe Don was under arrest in Mexico and couldn't call her.
The only place I still haven't looked that I feel somewhat hopeful of being able to find him alive is going to be Mexico, and I don't know how hard or how long that'll take. I
So you
imagine
think maybe a prison?
Yeah. I can't think of anything else that would keep him away this long. I find it hard to believe he'd walk away and leave me.
Don's family began to think the worst, that Don was dead, and that Carol played a role in his death.
What was your first thought?
I would love to tell you, but I better not.
Can you give me a hint?
You got it.
You thought it was her?
I can't say that.
Would I be wrong in assuming that that was your first thought?
Maybe.
Maybe I'd be wrong?
Maybe you might be right.
And then the case took a turn. Police found Don's van abandoned at a remote airport. The keys were reportedly still in it. Remember, Don had been planning to go to Costa Rica for work.
There is the theory that he just got tired of everything and jumped in an airplane and flew to Costa Rica and drove up the mountain and is living happily ever after there.
Don had owned several planes, and he loved to fly.
Tell me a little bit about this airplane. So it's a Piper Aero 3.
Joe Solon has flown hundreds of hours in one type of plane that Don Lewis liked to fly.
You can roughly get about 700 miles to a full tank, the two main tanks full. I know. So if, say, you were going to go from the Tampa area down to Costa Rica, it's not a nonstop flight. No. So that's like how many refueling stops? Oh, probably 3 to 4 at least. Yeah.
If he did refuel, no one seems to know about it. Besides, Don's family says he would never just take off and leave them. But if Don didn't just fly off to begin a new life somewhere, what was his van doing at the airport?
I've heard at the time that he was strangled from the back seat of an airplane with an electric cord and pushed out 50 feet over the Gulf.
Arrow 09 Mike will depart 29, left turn out to the south.
I'm also a pilot. And I fly the same type of plane Don often flew.
First of all, imagine the struggle involved in strangling a 170-pound man in this passenger seat. Then, if the plan was to push him out the door, that's a challenge. The slowest this airplane can fly is about 65 miles per hour, and that means winds approaching hurricane strength would be pushing against this door, trying to keep it closed. You'd have to open it, you'd have to keep it open, and you'd have to somehow wrestle the body out of here without interfering with the flight controls. Bottom line, I guess you could do it, but there are easier ways to get rid of a body.
And there was no evidence that any of Don's planes were missing. So if it's unlikely Don Lewis was pushed out of a small airplane, where was he? As the mystery got deeper, the theories got wilder.
What were some of those theories or rumors?
Someone said he was under a septic tank on Big Cat Rescue.
In the summer of 1997, Carol spoke with the local Fox TV station.
I'm very worried. It's just a feeling. But he is okay, that he will just walk back in the gate.
But Don never did.
It's very hard in the 21st century to go missing as a middle-aged man who has a very active cellular records, banking records, etc.
Alex Spiro is an attorney and a former New York City prosecutor. He's now working for Don Lewis's daughters.
Well, there are all sorts of theories about what might have happened to Don. One of them was that he was tossed out of an airplane. Do you find that credible?
Sometimes in high-profile cases, people come up with fanciful theories of, tigers, lions, bears, and airplanes. I mean, there's usually a simpler explanation of things.
Spiro says the simplest thing of all is to start with the timeline of the day Lewis disappeared.
There's a critical window here where Don Lewis went missing. And what really matters and where the rubber meets the road is what happened during those 24 hours.
So what happened during those 24 hours? Carol says she last saw Don Lewis early in the morning of August 18th, 1997, when she came home from running a late-night errand.
She would not talk to us in person this time, so she sent us a couple of diary entries.
Leonora Lapeter Anton is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the Tampa Bay Times and a CBS consultant.
And one of them was what she did that night, the Sunday, August 17th, 1997.
Carol says that late that Sunday night before Don went missing, she needed milk and supplies for her wild cats.
At 11 o'clock, she had these kittens that were in the house. There was a bobcat kitten and 2 caracal kittens. And she didn't have enough ingredients for the milk.
In her diaries, Carol says she left Don and drove to a supermarket about 6 miles away, but the store was closed. And then the story takes another twist. She says her car broke down. Carol says she walked all the way home. It took her until nearly 4 a.m.
And then when she got home, Don wanted to immediately go back and get the car. So at 4 in the morning, they went back. He got the radiator cap off, put water in it, and then they drove home. 2 hours later, she saw him in the doorway and he was leaving. He just left. And that's the last time she saw him.
Don's ex-wife has her doubts about that story.
I don't think she was going to buy milk, no, okay?
You do not?
No, she wasn't going to go buy milk.
You think that she was up to no good that night?
Could be.
What happened next has raised even more suspicions. After Don disappeared, Carol produced what she said was Don's will and power of attorney, leaving her in charge of everything. But Don's family says his signature on those documents is forged.
Would I be wrong in assuming that you believe that Carol was involved in making up these wills, the will and the power of attorney?
You could be.
I could be wrong?
You could be right.
If she was involved, why would she want to have Don Lewis killed?
M-O-N-E-Y.
Money.
Of course. That happens all the time, the world we live in today.
Leonora Lapeter Anton had 4 handwriting experts examine Don's signature on the power of attorney. All said the signature did not look authentic.
2 of them said they felt it was traced from the 1991 marriage license between Don and Carol, and that basically they were, not accurate Don Lewis signatures.
But Carol says the signatures were authenticated back in 1997 and are real. The Tampa Bay Times also looked into Don's former right-hand man, Kenny Farr. Remember, he reportedly helped Carol get into Don's office that day.
He was basically a jack of all trades, his right-hand man. And then after Don Lewis disappeared, he went and worked with Carol Baskin.
He was driving one of Don's vans, Don's blue van.
Trish Farr Payne was married to Kenny for 5 years. In her first ever TV interview, she told 48 Hours that 2 days before Don Lewis was reported missing, Farr came home with Don Lewis's van, and inside there was a pile of guns.
He said, help me carry these in. We carried them in, we put them under the bed, we put them in the closet, we put them in the little bathroom we had in our room. I was like, whoa, where did you get these? He said, listen, I'm hanging on to these right now for Carol, but he said, Don's gone, and I don't want you talking about him.
Did you ask him what he meant by Don's gone?
No, not right then, because he would blow up real easy at me, and I just didn't question it.
Later that week, she heard on the news that Don had gone missing.
Everything started kind of coming together. Kenny's got Don's van, Kenny's got Don's guns, Don's gone, and I knew Don was gone the day before he supposedly was missing. Something wasn't right.
She says she was too afraid to ask Kenny, but it was hard to ignore some very strange things, like the large freezer with a padlock that she says appeared on their porch around the time Don disappeared. And then, she says, the freezer vanished.
How long after Don disappeared did the freezer disappear?
About a week after Don disappeared.
But Trish says she waited years to tell police about her suspicions.
I was afraid for my kids. You know, I had my kids. I was afraid for them. I was more afraid for them than anything.
She says he made that one threat that was especially frightening and bizarre and maybe revealing.
Kenny had threatened to put me in the grinder. He said, if you try to leave me again, I'm going to put you in the grinder like I did Don.
I'm sorry, he said what?
He said, if you try to leave me again, I will put you in the grinder like I did Don.
In a meat grinder?
Yeah. I thought he was telling the truth. I knew deep down that Kenny has some part in Don's not ever coming back. I knew then for sure.
My goodness, so you sort of thought at that point that you were living with a murderer?
Yeah.
3 years after Don went missing, in the midst of her divorce from Kenny Farr, Trish says she finally told the police everything. Kenny Farr wouldn't talk to 48 Hours on camera, but told us Trish's story is, as he put it, a outlandish lie. He says, I had absolutely nothing to do with Don's disappearance. Farr also says he cooperated with police at the time of Don's disappearance and even took a polygraph. Now, attorney Alex Spiro says he's found some new witnesses.
Have you met these witnesses?
Yes.
And you believe them?
Yes.
He said, if you try to leave me again, I will put you in the grinder like I did Don.
Do you consider Trish Farr Payne credible?
Yes.
Attorney Alex Spiro has been investigating the disappearance of Don Lewis for months. He doesn't want to say much because his investigation is still going on, but he will say there's been some progress.
Has there been a new witness who surfaced who can shed significant light on what happened or corroborate Trish Farr Payne's version of what happened or just clear up some of these unclear matters?
There have been, yes.
If that's true, you're a heck of a lot closer to figuring out what happened than many people might know.
I like to think I'm closer to figuring out what happened than many people would know, yes.
The obvious question is, what about Carol Baskin?
You were going to be a fur coat, weren't you, honey?
After Don's disappearance in 1997, Carol Lewis carried on at her sanctuary, Wildlife on Easy Street.
It is a lot of work. Feeding is one thing that he was always here for.
On August 19, 2002, 5 years to the day Don Lewis was reported missing, Carol had a judge declare Don dead. Gradually, the investigation into his whereabouts went cold.
She's a good girl. Yes, she is.
In 2004, Carol got married again, this time to Howard Baskin, a businessman, and the ceremony was unusual, even by Florida standards, perhaps.
Howard wore like a toga, a tiger pattern toga, and was like a caveman. And he came to her on the beach and she hit him over the head with a plastic bat. And then he picked her up and threw her over his shoulder. And then apparently she put a leash around his neck. You know, it's not how I would have done my wedding, but...
Carol Lewis became Carol Baskin, and Wildlife on Easy Street got a new name too.
Hi, I'm Carol Baskin, and I'm the founder and CEO of Big Cat Rescue.
Howard has an MBA and a law degree, and he sort of brought a business sense to Big Cat Rescue. He brought in like a Washington lobbyist. He knew people in the community. He basically was really good at getting donations.
Our donations last year alone were up 50%.
The organization's mission also changed. There was no more breeding or buying big cats.
Our goal is to end the trade in big cats.
Carol is an animal rights advocate.
We can do it with help from people like you.
Someone who believes no one should own a wild cat, not even herself. She spoke about it in a 2018 interview with CBS affiliate WTSP.
Our mission is to put ourselves out of business because there shouldn't have to be a place rescuing lions and tigers from people that get them as pets.
Carol eventually went after Joseph Maldonado Passage. You know him as Joe Exotic, an exotic animal owner in Oklahoma. In 2010, she tried to stop him from taking his baby tigers to shopping malls around the country, charging money for pictures. Joe fought back.
Hi, Carol Baskin, down there at Big Cat Rescue.
And tried to take the name of Carol's organization and make it his own. So Carol sued him.
She has spent over $1.5 million just trying to shut me down.
She won, and a judge ordered Mr. Exotic to pay Carol nearly $1 million. And that only added more fuel to their feud.
I'm already so damn poor, I use a file cabinet from my dresser drawers.
Joe took to his YouTube channel, Joe Exotic TV, to air his grievances in his own exotic way.
Can you believe they spent enough time to build another entire website about me?
For Joe, nothing was off limits.
Word has it that Carol snuck up on Don in the middle of the night.
And he gleefully revived those suspicions about Don Lewis's disappearance. Joe made that music video with a woman who was supposed to be a Carol Baskin lookalike, pushing that unsubstantiated theory that she fed her husband Don to the tigers. Joe's hatred of Carol Baskin started feeding on itself.
And you think I'm obsessed with you?
And getting more violent.
Carol Baskin better never, ever see me face to face.
He's posted pictures of an effigy of me hanging and pointing a gun to my head.
And Joe Exotic may have done more than pretend to kill Carol.
A jury finds former Wynnewood Animal Park owner Joe Exotic guilty.
In 2019, he was convicted of, among other things, hiring a hitman to actually kill her. He got 22 years. Meanwhile, Carol had a new theory about who might be responsible for her ex-husband's disappearance.
She clawed his face up pretty badly. He said he almost had to knock her out to get the gun away from her because she was so intent on killing him.
In January 2021, then-President Donald Trump held the keys to Joe Exotic's prison cell. His legal team hoped for a full presidential pardon.
I think we're going to get the pardon. I do. I'm 100% sure.
A very stretched limo waited near his federal prison, ready to whisk the Tiger King away from captivity. But the limo left empty. There was no pardon. Joe Exotic's case is closed, but Florida Sheriff Chad Chronister still doesn't know what happened to Don Lewis. He thinks Don was murdered, and more than one person might be involved.
This wealthy individual left his wealth behind, left his money behind. You know, when's the last time you've ever heard someone leaving without their wealth behind?
But the more bizarre theories about what happened are too much, even for a lawman in Florida.
They talked about the meat grinder and that the meat grinders were used to feed the cats. Well, the meat grinders had been removed from the property, several weeks before his disappearance. I'm not saying they couldn't have been involved, but they weren't on the property.
With all those uncertainties and those millions of Tiger King viewers demanding answers, the sheriff ordered his team to take a new look at the case.
As a result of Tiger King, we contacted and followed up on well over 200 leads.
Moses Garcia is a homicide detective for Hillsborough County. He says all those tips didn't help much.
A large amount of those were virtually useless.
And Garcia says some of his efforts at investigation have been blocked by Carol.
In the first Tiger King, there were some rumors that came out that Don Lewis was buried in a septic tank or underneath a septic tank on the property. We wanted to go onto the property and kind of look around, but we were not allowed access. It is frustrating. I'd like to get on that property and look around a little bit.
The detectives also say they've been unable to interview Carol Baskin.
She does a lot of interviews where she says that the sheriff's office has not even approached her. That can be very frustrating when you know you've approached multiple times and you've been told no. Most missing persons, wives, spouses, they cooperate with the law enforcement.
Carol's alleged lack of recent cooperation does seem to have increased the sheriff's focus on her.
The only people that have refused to be interviewed has been Carol Baskins and Kenny Farr.
In an interview with TMZ, Carol said since Don went missing, she has released scores of documents and done many interviews. TMZ reports Carol said she has nothing new to tell detectives and is declining to speak to investigator Garcia on advice of her lawyer. But she did email us saying Trish Farr Payne's story about Kenny is false. She called Trish's description of the meat grinder, quote, ludicrous and clearly fabricated, unquote. And as for Don's family's accusations that she canceled Don's cell phone just weeks after he disappeared, she says that never happened. And she told us regarding the family, quote, they are liars, unquote. And Carol says Don's allegation that she threatened his life is just made up.
The judge denied his application, saying Don wasn't in any immediate danger.
She says she never threatened Don, and he only sought a restraining order to stop her from throwing out mountains of stuff he'd accumulated. But Carol says she may know who did threaten Don. It's an explosive allegation. Carol says it's Gladys, Don's ex-wife, who might be the real villain. According to Carol, Gladys was angry over a lawsuit she filed against Don after their divorce. She sued him for $1 million, but Gladys lost.
Could she have been so angry over not getting the $1 million more that she thought she would get, that she would kill Don in a last-ditch effort to recover the money she felt he owed her for all of her suffering?
The Lewis family's new attorney, Alex Spiro, says that's nonsense.
I have seen no credible evidence that the Lewis family has anything to do with Don Lewis's disappearance.
If all the attention is hard on Carol, she's made the most of it.
Meow.
Tiger King has made her a queen. She was on Dancing with the Stars. Tyra Banks introduced her.
Carol Baskin.
And she's come out with a documentary on the streaming channel Discovery Plus. Carol Baskin's cage fight.
You're abusing big cats? I'm coming for you.
As for the Don Lewis case, his family is still hopeful. And they say, after more than 20 years, the publicity around Tiger King has changed everything, with more tips and leads coming in every day.
We feel like we have an army of angels behind us at this point.
Is Joe Exotic one of those angels?
He might be leading the whole band.
"48 Hours. Don't miss an episode."
I really like to solve puzzles, and genealogy kind of is like that. It offers you this endless stream of blanks to fill in. My name's Chelsea Rustad, and in 2013, I began my search for my own family history. And it took me down lots of unexpected paths along the way. In 2015, I saw on Ancestry's Facebook page, they were running a contest, and 2 winners would receive an Ancestry DNA kit. They contacted me and said, Chelsea, you're one of the winners. The Ancestry DNA kit arrived. You just kind of spit in a tube and seal it up, and then it was on its way.
Did you have any idea just what kind of story your DNA would tell?
I really didn't.
I was a genealogy hobbyist, like millions of other people in the United States. I kind of accidentally fell into it. I'm Cece Moore, and I'm an investigative genetic genealogist, and that means I use DNA to try to help law enforcement find violent criminals. When the Golden State Killer suspect was identified through investigative genetic genealogy, there were many people who said this wasn't a tool that would be used commonly in law enforcement, and I wanted to prove them wrong.
And genetic genealogy has exposed a lot of secrets that people had hoped would remain secret.
Yes, oftentimes it's someone's deepest, darkest secret.
All I'm thinking is, oh, it's gonna confirm my ethnic background, and maybe I'll get to connect with some cousins. I was excited. I was just really optimistic about, like, maybe it will uncover something cool.
A young Canadian couple takes a road trip from Vancouver Island to Seattle in November 1987.
18-year-old Tanya Van Kylenborg and her 20-year-old boyfriend, Jay Cook, had disappeared during a round trip from Victoria. Skagit County has the first half of this puzzling case.
In May of 2018, I got a knock on the door, and it was 2 investigators from Skagit County. And I was so confused. What are they investigating?
The murder of 18-year-old Tanya Van Kylenborg. Her body was found in a ditch near the town of...
Her boyfriend, Jay Cook, dead too. His body found near Monroe a few days later.
Strangled with some kind of ligature.
They let me know that they are investigating a family member of mine for murder, a double homicide from 1987. This was a person who was in my family tree.
Did that name appear on any of the suspects' lists?
No, that name had never been across my desk, ever.
Without genetic genealogy, would we know who killed Tanya and Jay?
No.
I know that my DNA played a big part of that.
It's been a learning curve. This was all brand new. It's the web of matches. It's putting those puzzle pieces together little by little.
I have a problem that I'm relentless, and I don't give up.
There may be no more dogged investigator than Snohomish County cold case detective Jim Sharp, especially when it came to the murders of Tanya Van Kylenborg and Jay Cook.
It was probably the most horrendous unsolved case that we had. Tanya Van Kylenborg was an 18-year-old girl. She just graduated from high school. She was in a new relationship with Jay Cook.
On November 18, 1987, the young couple left British Columbia in Jay's parents' van, heading for Seattle, Washington.
Jay was going to go to Jen's Co-Heating in Seattle to pick up some furnace parts for his dad.
They planned to sleep in the van near the store and drive back to Canada the next day.
So when they didn't show up that evening, the families became concerned.
We just had no idea where they might be or what might have transpired.
Tanya's big brother John was at college when he got a call from his worried father. John, would your sister ever just go off and not call your parents?
No, I don't think that had ever happened. If the plans had changed and she was going to spend another night, she would have called my parents.
After Tanya and Jay were reported missing, law enforcement began looking for them. Desperate for answers, John and his father joined the search in Seattle.
Something was gravely wrong. I mean, the obvious things in terms of them being in hospital or something, or just simply with a flat tire somewhere, all those more innocent explanations were pretty much vanishing.
On November 24th, 6 days after the couple disappeared, John's worst fears were confirmed. Tanya's body was found at the bottom of a ditch in rural Skagit County, some 80 miles north of Seattle.
She wasn't wearing any pants or panties, and her bra was pushed up over her breasts. So it obviously looked like a rape murder.
Tanya had been shot in the head at close range.
She rolled down the hill. It was a quick execution.
Later that evening, John had to identify his sister's body.
Such a crushing feeling that all of a sudden you see her lying there. It's definitely horrific. But we had no idea still about where was Jay, where was the van, how did this happen, why did it happen?
The next day, Tanya's wallet, the keys to the van, some bullets, and a number of other items turned up 16 miles away in Bellingham. They had been discarded under the porch of a local tavern next to the Greyhound bus station. Police located the van in a nearby parking lot, but Jay was still missing.
The following day, Jay's body was found here underneath High Bridge.
He was about 70 miles south of where Tanya had been found.
It was a horrible scene.
Her 20-year-old boyfriend had been strangled, a pack of cigarettes stuffed down his throat. What did most investigators think about this killer? I mean, who does something like this?
Right, that was the big question. This was a person who was a real predator, and it was believed at the time that it was probably a serial killer or an ex-convict.
But finding that predator would be challenging. Investigators and forensic scientists had 4 crime scenes scattered over 3 counties, but few clues. A bullet casing found on the hillside near Tanya's body matched those bullets collected at the tavern in Bellingham, but a gun was never found. This surgical glove was discovered under the porch. Investigators believe the killer wore it to avoid leaving fingerprints, but he may have been careless.
There was a palm print on the back of the van that they believed hopefully belonged to the suspect.
Inside the van, they found what would ultimately be the most important piece of evidence: the black pants Tanya had been wearing.
They found that there was semen on Tanya's pants, and when they examined the semen, they learned that it couldn't be left from Jay.
The sample matched the DNA found inside Tanya's body and would later be known as Individual A. But the only evidence that connected all 4 crime scenes, these plastic zip ties found near Tanya and Jay's bodies, under the porch, and inside the van. According to Detective Sharp, they were part of the killer's rape murder kit.
This was a predator that was hunting for a victim that he wanted to rape. And maybe in his mind, he decided that he was going to kill him too.
They were 2 mild-mannered, soft-spoken kids. They weren't out to pick a fight with anyone. I mean, both families were just so devastated.
Hoping to find the killer, Tanya's family offered a $50,000 reward for information. Tips came in, but none panned out.
The police, to their credit, were trying to chase down every sort of theory.
Over the years, the theories and false leads would grow, and more than 200 names would fill the case file. Some were convicted felons, and then there was Charles Sinclair.
He was believed to be a serial killer across the western United States.
There was also an anonymous writer who sent threatening letters to Jay and Tanya's families, claiming to be the killer.
Yeah, it was just unfathomable to think that, somebody not only had done these murders, but then was going to continue taunting the families with these letters.
But every suspect's DNA was compared to individual A's profile, and none matched.
The goal was to try to figure out who did this semen sample belong to.
Lisa Collins, a forensic scientist with the Washington State Patrol, uploaded individual A's profile to CODIS, the FBI's National Offender Database.
As the years went by, just complete silence. It's disheartening. You just are afraid that this might be one of those cases that's never going to be solved.
And then, more than 30 years after Tanya and Jay were killed, there's a break in the case.
I was skeptical. I was hopeful, but I was skeptical. And I'm a believer now.
Go inside the decades-long search for Jay and Tanya's killer at 48hours.com.
We had those original semen samples from the pants and then from Tanya's body, trying to figure out who this sample may belong to. That was the tedious and hard part.
The man police believe killed Tanya Van Cuylenborg and Jay Cook left behind a forensic calling card, says Lisa Collins, but still managed to elude capture for years. And then in 2017, Detective Jim Sharp heard about an innovative tool developed by Parabon Nanolabs that uses DNA evidence to predict the genetic traits of an unknown suspect. It's called snapshot phenotyping.
They gather all that information and they end up making a snapshot of what an individual with all those traits might look similar to.
Parabon was hired to use individual A's DNA to create this composite sketch, which gave Sharp some clues as to what the suspect could look like at the ages of 25, 45, and 65. But he still didn't have a name.
Investigators in California say DNA evidence led them to one of the country's most notorious serial killers.
And then in 2018, a stunning arrest in California opened new doors for law enforcement.
The so-called Golden State Killer.
The man responsible for numerous rapes and murders was finally apprehended after 43 years using genetic genealogy. Did a little light bulb go over your head at that moment?
Oh yeah, big light bulb.
The Golden State Killer's DNA had been uploaded to GEDmatch, a genetic database that allows users of various consumer test kits to share and compare their DNA.
This is fantastic. I need to get on this.
Parabon agreed to upload individual A's DNA to GEDmatch and called in genetic genealogist Cece Moore. She's known for her work on the PBS show Finding Your Roots.
So then what did you do?
DNA.
DNA.
So all we have is DNA. We're going to turn to
And
the
she's
DNA
famed
and
for
see
skills at mapping family trees. But this was her first criminal case.
I had had a lot of doubts whether this was the right thing for me to do, and I finally made the decision, okay, I'm going to do this. But a lot was riding on that case.
It was a case she had been following for years and felt a personal connection to. Moore's parents were from the Pacific Northwest, and she was the same age as Tanya Van Cuylenborg.
She was killed right when I was graduating high school and going on to college, and my life was just really beginning, and hers ended so tragically. And so I think it always stuck with me.
On Friday, April 27, 2018, Individual A's DNA file was uploaded to GEDmatch.
It's compared against everyone that's participating in that database. And so what they're looking for are long segments of identical DNA between two people. Sometimes the match list will show up right away, and sometimes it takes a couple days. So I stayed up really late that Friday night. I kept checking, there was no matches.
The next morning, Moore logged on to see if there was a list.
And there was. And so we're hoping for at least a second cousin or closer at the top of that list. And we used to call that being struck by lightning.
Were you struck by lightning in this case?
Twice. We were struck by lightning twice.
On the list were two people who shared enough DNA with Individual A to be his second cousins. And what was that feeling like?
It was pretty exciting and scary.
In this case, the cousins shared DNA with Individual A, but not with each other, which meant they're related to him on different branches of his family tree. But to figure out who he was, Moore first had to find out who they were.
Now, fortunately, one of the people at the top of that list had a really unique name.
And what was her name?
Chelsea Rustad.
Remember, Chelsea Rustad had taken that ancestry DNA test and then went a step further.
You can download your raw DNA file to your computer and then upload it to GEDmatch. I just had no inkling at all that there were secret relatives I didn't know about or mysteries to uncover.
Neither did the other second cousin, whom Moore was also able to identify, but has chosen to remain anonymous.
And then I built the family trees of those top two matches. And surprisingly quickly, I discovered how they converged. It only took me 2 hours to come to the identification of who I believed to be Tanya and Jay's killer.
This is a person who had eluded capture, investigation for 31 years, and you were able to identify this person in 2 hours?
That's the power of genetic genealogy, yeah.
But how sure were you?
I was very sure.
But isn't that scary, Cece, because your work might end up with this person in prison?
Right, and at that moment, I'm the only person in the world who knows that he's probably guilty of this crime, other than him, of course. And so it is a super heavy burden.
Monday morning, April 30th, Detective Jim Sharp got the news.
We've got it narrowed down to one guy. And I'm thinking, I don't believe this. And my first thought is, who's the guy?
Would you upload your DNA to a genealogy website? Chat now on Facebook and Twitter.
+30 years, dozens of dead ends, hundreds of false leads. And then in April 2018, Cece Moore got on a computer, and out of the billions of people on Earth identified through genetic genealogy, the one man she believed killed Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg. Who was the person you identified?
William Earl Talbot II.
William Earl Talbot II. When Detective Jim Sharp heard the name, he ran it through the system and was surprised to learn that Talbot had no felony convictions.
It was a new name that we'd never heard of before. But it was sure nice when we found out that he only lived 7 miles from the bridge where Jay's body was found.
Scharf also learned that in 1987, Talbot, 24 at the time, worked as a delivery driver and made stops near where Jay and Tanya were headed to pick up that furnace part, and says that Talbot was fired a few months before the murders.
So it makes sense that he was down in that area prowling around and probably ran into Jay and Tanya.
But Scharf needed more than old work records and genetic genealogy.
It's really just a tip. It's an investigative lead.
To make an arrest, Scharf needed to be sure that the DNA left at the crime scene by the man they knew only as Individual A matched William Talbot's. So somehow Scharf had to obtain a fresh DNA sample from Talbot himself.
We were going to follow him until he dropped or threw away anything that had touched his mouth, because we wanted his saliva on it as the best type of DNA source.
Investigators learned Talbot now drove a semi, and they began tailing his truck. One day, about a week later, they watched as Talbot stopped at a red light and opened the truck door.
The light changes to green, he slams the door and drives away, and there's a white paper cup laying on the street. It's blowing around in the wind. So they jump out, they go over and they collect the cup and they call me.
Scharf rushed the paper cup to forensic scientist Lisa Collins with the Washington State Patrol.
They wanted me to test this cup and just see if I could get a DNA profile from it.
Scharf left the cup at the lab to await the results. Cece Moore had already begun searching for Talbot online and quickly found his sisters and father on social media.
I couldn't find hardly anything about him. You know, no marriages. I could find very little footprint online at all. And that was a little unusual.
Years earlier, someone else who knew nothing about the investigation had made a similar search, Chelsea Rustad. In 2013, long before she submitted her DNA to any websites, Chelsea Googled her grandpa's sister Blanche and found a lot of information online.
Her daughter was Patty Talbot, and Patty had 3 daughters and 1 son, and the son was William Earl Talbot II.
These were Chelsea's second cousins, the Talbots. Chelsea friended 2 of the sisters on Facebook, but their brother William was a mystery.
This guy was just kind of a question mark, off the grid.
Chelsea figured William was estranged from his family, but didn't give it much thought, even after she uploaded her DNA to Ancestry.com and then GEDmatch. So she was stunned that day in 2018 when those investigators showed up on her doorstep and asked to see her research.
And I'm just kind of like, wait, you're saying one of my family members is connected to a murder? And they're saying, you know, yeah, it's from 1987, and the person of interest is William Earl Talbot. And I'm just kind of grasping the scope of this and, you know, sickened thinking about it.
The investigators wanted to know her impression of William Talbot.
I told them my theory that I think he's estranged.
Detective Scharf got more details from Talbot's friends and family.
He had a history of anger and violence when he was younger.
He was a really angry kid.
In audio-taped interviews with Talbot's sisters, Scharf learned William's troubles began when he was 11 and his father was seriously hurt in a motorcycle accident. The sisters say William began to lash out.
He beat me up, broke my tailbone. I had to go to the hospital.
Another sister says William hurt her too. Still, she said she didn't think he was capable of murder.
Yeah, he'd be a bonehead, but not to the point of attacking or killing somebody, no.
But would the DNA on the paper cup tell a different story? That was on Detective Scharf's mind when he returned to the police lab and Lisa Collins shared the results of her testing.
I said the profile from the cup matches individual A. It was just an amazing moment, yeah.
What did that feel like, Jim?
I got tears in my eyes. I'm like, I can't believe it. It's so emotional. And then I'm like, yeah, we got him.
And so on May 17, 2018, nearly 31 years after two carefree teenagers set out on a road trip and never returned, Detective Sharp arrested William Talbot.
And he says, John, we've got him.
Sharp called Tanya's brother John right away, saying that at long last, individual A was in handcuffs.
Yeah, I mean, that's when it really sent a chill down my spine. It was pretty overwhelming to think that it had all culminated in that moment right there, 31 years later.
The next day, William Talbot was charged with Tanya's murder. Charges for Jay's murder soon followed. Jay's sister spoke at a press conference.
It's hard to put into words this feeling of relief, of joy, of great sorrow that this arrest brings.
Jay's mom said the moment was bittersweet.
On one hand, we're close to closure, and on the other, we're still at a loss. And I don't have my only son, Jay.
Detective Sharp told the group he was grateful for breakthroughs in DNA technology.
If it hadn't been for genetic genealogy, we wouldn't be standing here today.
But would evidence obtained through genetic genealogy be allowed in court?
Okay, let's go.
More than 3 decades had passed since those dark November days in 1987, when Jay and Tanya were found murdered.
William Earl Talbot is now accused of killing.
Now, with William Talbot's arrest, Tanya's brother, John Van Cuylenborg, was finally able to face the man suspected of his sister's murder. And what did you think the first time you saw him?
You just reviled. I mean, it's hard to control your emotions.
Talbot pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of aggravated murder. And so in June of 2019, his trial began in the Snohomish County Superior Court.
It was the first case ever to go to a jury trial where the suspect had been identified through investigative genetic genealogy.
Although the Golden State Killer had been identified first, Talbot's trial would be held before his. And Cece Moore was acutely aware of how much was riding on the outcome.
We didn't know at that point how genetic genealogy was going to be treated in court because there was no precedence.
The prosecution was hoping to make it a non-issue.
I was going to minimize the exposure by kind of downplaying the importance of the genetic genealogy, knowing full well that was the part of the case that was perhaps most intriguing to people.
Chief Criminal Deputy Matthew Baldock was the lead prosecutor on Talbot's case. He approached the defense with a proposal. They would stipulate to the jury that the DNA from individual A had come from William Talbot as an agreed-upon fact.
Much to my surprise, they agreed.
It was a major victory for the prosecution. The use of genetic genealogy to locate a suspect would not be contested in court.
That was a huge relief. Really, it was the best possible outcome.
So you admit that that is William Talbot's DNA, am I correct?
You're correct. That was the stipulation.
Talbot's attorneys, John Scott and Rachel Ford, would argue that there's actually an innocent explanation for that DNA.
Every indication of the DNA found from my client indicated consensual sex.
Yes, they admit that Talbot had sex with Tanya, but they deny he raped or killed her or Jay Cook. They point out that Tanya and Jay were missing for several days before their bodies were found, implying that the couple must have encountered their killer later on. Tell me what you think then happened to Tanya and Jay.
We don't know what happened. These kids were off to an adventure. Whether they went to a bar, a restaurant, some sort of club to meet people, I don't know.
Talbot's lawyers say it's understandable that Talbot might not remember meeting Tanya or even where he was 30 years ago. But it's significant, they say, that investigators were unable to link Talbot to the type of gun that killed Tanya, the pack of cigarettes, or the materials used to strangle Jay. So William Talbot's defense is basically that he had sex with Tanya and then somehow somebody else killed her.
That's not William Talbot's defense. William Talbot's defense is that there is insufficient evidence to prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
But prosecutors say they do have sufficient evidence. There's Talbot's DNA from Tanya's body and her pants. The fact that he lived just 7 miles from where Jay's body was found, and the palm print on the van that police say was a match to Talbot. Then there are the zip ties found at all 4 crime scenes. Baldock says they prove the connection between Jay's murder and Tanya's and the van. What do you believe the zip ties were used for?
I believe that Mr. Talbot had Jay and Tanya in the van for some period of time after he abducted or kidnapped them. And I believe that he used the zip ties to restrain them.
As part of his investigation, Detective Sharp had hoped to obtain a usable DNA profile from any of the zip ties.
There had been a mixture of DNA on one of the zip ties that was found in Jay's van, and they weren't able to discern who all the profiles belonged to.
But mid-trial, forensic scientist Lisa Collins had decided to run that DNA mixture into a new software program to see if she could find a match. And to her surprise, she did.
When I compared William Talbot's DNA profile to the mixture obtained from the zip tie that was found in the victim's van, he was included as a possible contributor.
But because her discovery came during trial, prosecutors felt it was too late to present to the jury, fearing it would delay the trial. Talbot elected not to take the stand, and his lawyers were hopeful that the jury would agree there was not enough evidence to prove him guilty. In their closing arguments, the defense told the jury that police were unreasonably focused on the DNA.
They never stopped to consider that perhaps the person who left the DNA was not the murderer.
Attorney Ford argued that Detective Jim Sharp had tunnel vision. Is it at all possible that, yes, that was William Talbot's DNA, but he didn't kill either one of them?
Is that possible? Sure. Is it reasonable? No. She was found without her pants or underwear. So just practically speaking, is the claim that Mr. Talbot had consensual sex with her and then she got dressed and the person who ultimately killed her undressed her?
Baldock says the only reasonable theory is that Talbot had overpowered the couple with a plan of raping Tanya and then killed them both.
He had zip ties, he had gloves, he had a firearm, he had ammunition.
After a 2-week-long trial, the jury began to deliberate. But they didn't come back that first day, or the second.
You realize this is really going to be the moment of truth.
On that third day of deliberations, the families of Jay Cook and Tanya Van Cuylenborg finally got news. There was a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, William Earl Talbot II, guilty of the crime of first-degree murder as charged.
Guilty. William Talbot had been found guilty of the aggravated murder of Tanya Van Cuylenborg and guilty of the aggravated murder of Jay Cook.
Just to hear the foreman of the jury say guilty was surreal.
Cece Moore wasn't in the courtroom, but she later saw video of Tanya's brother John's reaction.
It was as if I could see a physical burden lift off his shoulders. He had told me how he had carried this burden for years. You know, he was the only sibling. He was her older brother. And so that was incredible to see.
Chelsea Rustad had never spoken to either Jay or Tanya's family, but with their blessing, she decided to attend Talbot's sentencing, where she first met John.
Chelsea.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
I was really nervous. He looked a little bit nervous as well.
She's effectively a family member of the murderer. So I think it was brave of her to take that risk.
Thank you for coming today.
At the sentencing, Jay Cook's mother told the judge about the grief she has carried all these years.
Some of us wanted a shirt or a sweater. You could wear them. You could put them to your nose and smell him. I still have that old sweater in my dresser drawer.
The sentence was mandatory.
Thank you.
The court's only possible sentence on each count is to impose a sentence of life without possibility of release.
2 life terms in prison without parole. Chelsea says her sympathy is for Jay and Tanya's families, despite her genetic ties to Talbot.
All right.
His dad wasn't there. His sisters weren't there. He had a family member in the audience, and I was there supporting the victims.
Chelsea Rustad is proud that her DNA helped bring a killer to justice. But there are some who have concerns about this new frontier in police work.
It might be that you're not the Golden State Killer, but it also might be that you don't want law enforcement scrutinizing your entire family.
Law professor Andrea Roth is head of the UC Berkeley Center for Law and Technology and says one of the problems she sees is that the DNA used for genetic genealogy can be very revealing.
This is DNA testing that tells you a lot about a person's very sensitive information, their medical history, information about familial lines that the families themselves don't even know.
Professor Roth does agree that in cases like this, genetic genealogy can be an effective tool for the public good. But she cautions that most states have no restrictions on its use.
There's the concern that the government could use your DNA for some reason other than a criminal investigation that it shouldn't be using it for. Giving it to insurance companies or using DNA to find out who was at a protest meeting. We don't have evidence right now of the government doing that, but those are reasons that somebody might want to think about before they decide to upload their DNA.
Because of this lack of legal oversight, Roth has deep reservations about sharing DNA on public genealogy websites. Would you not upload your DNA?
I would not.
But it may already be too late for Professor Roth or many other Americans to truly opt out. Experts estimate that today, more than 90% of white Americans can be identified using genetic genealogy. And that's because, says Cece Moore, those of European descent are well represented on websites like GEDmatch.
We have enough DNA. We can identify almost anyone of Northwest European ancestry. Even if it takes hours, dozens of hours, hundreds of hours, we'll get there.
But in this case, after more than 30 years with no solid leads, Moore was able to use Chelsea Rustad's DNA to help locate a viable suspect in just 2 hours. Was this the fastest you've ever found a suspect?
It was. To this day, 3.5 years later, hundreds of cases later, this was the most straightforward case I've ever worked. And that is amazing.
Detective Scharf believes that this case changed the face of cold case investigations forever.
Genetic genealogy is the best tool that's come around since DNA. You don't need a CODIS database to get your match.
For Jay and Tanya's families, it means they finally have some answers and a measure of peace. On Tanya's grave, her parents inscribed the final line from a poem she wrote when she was 17. There is a place that I know of where up above there flies a dove, and slowly as it turns to dawn, she parts her wings and then she's gone.
She was growing up and maturing and spreading her wings and getting her feet under her, and then she was gone.
You miss her still, don't you?
Yeah, definitely.
Serial killers can be very difficult to predict.
4 families shattered when their daughters go missing. 2 were not found. 20 years. Will the prime suspect finally reveal where they are?
A little bit of a cat and mouse game.
48 Hours, next on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.